By the 14th century, the Byzantine Empire was a ghost of Roman antiquity. Its vast territories across the Mediterranean had weathered away, leaving behind decaying infrastructure and abandoned provinces. Constantinople, the imperial capital, no longer anchored a contiguous empire. It was an isolated island of Roman authority, entirely surrounded by hostile forces and cut off from the lands it once governed. The city survived for one physical reason: the Theodosian walls. These massive fortifications stretched for miles, incorporating a deep moat, an outer wall, and towering inner gate towers that had shattered invading armies for a millennium. The Byzantine military apparatus had atrophied. Emperors no longer possessed the resources to project power outward across their borders. They relied entirely on retreating behind these stones and waiting out their enemies. The Roman Empire in the East was no longer an active player shaping global geopolitics. It was a stoic fortress, bracing for an inevitable final collision. Across the Sea of Marmara, on the Anatolian frontier, a very different structure emerged. The early Ottomans did not operate as a traditional nation-state with fixed borders. They were a highly mobile, predatory warband. Their political legitimacy was bound to the concept of Gaza, holy war. To sustain their economy and attract new warriors, they required constant outward military expansion into non-Muslim territories. The Ottoman state was governed from the saddle. The sultan's authority came directly from his presence on the battlefield, physically leading the conquest and distributing the spoils. Where the Byzantines engineered towering, immovable defenses to survive, the Ottoman warband relied on agility, tribal loyalty, and the open steppe. The early Ottoman enterprise functioned as a perpetual motion machine. Its survival was entirely dependent on maintaining a continuous offensive momentum. Realizing the Theodosian walls were too strong for a direct assault, the Ottomans crossed into Europe, deliberately bypassing Constantinople to conquer the surrounding regions of Thrace and the Balkans. By absorbing these territories, they systematically severed the capital's overland trade routes and blocked military supply lines from Western Europe. The containment extended to the sea. Ottoman forces deployed naval blockades to choke off the Bosphorus waterway, cutting Constantinople's lifeline to the Black Sea. This strategy of isolation reached its peak under Sultan Bayezid I, who initiated a punishing multi-year siege on the city beginning in 1394. The Ottoman objective was clear. Rather than breaching the walls, they intended to starve the Roman Empire out of existence through total geographic asphyxiation. The rapid Ottoman consumption of the Balkans triggered widespread panic in Western Europe. Regional monarchs and the Pope scrambled to mobilize massive crusader coalitions to push the Turks back into Anatolia. Those efforts met immediate violent failure. In 1389, the Ottomans crushed Serbian resistance on the field of blackbirds at Kosovo, securing their regional grip. A larger European counterattack met an even worse fate. At the Battle of Nicopolis in 1396, a massive crusader army was completely routed. The heavy, inflexible plate armor and rigid tactics of the Western Knights proved useless against the speed and maneuverability of the light Ottoman cavalry. The disaster at Nicopolis destroyed the West's appetite for intervention. It solidified the myth of Ottoman invincibility, leaving an isolated Constantinople to face its end entirely alone. Just as Sultan Bayezid prepared to deliver the final blow to Constantinople, a sudden, massive threat emerged from the eastern steppes, forcing the Ottomans to turn their attention away from Europe. Timur, the ruthless founder of the Timurid Empire, brought a Turco-Mongol army that operated on the exact same principles of mobile, nomadic warfare as the Ottomans, but executed with far greater precision and scale. The two armies collided at the Battle of Ankara in 1402. Bayezid deployed his forces in rigid, traditional battle lines. Timur's tactical genius exposed this rigidity. He poisoned the local water supply and used his highly mobile cavalry to outflank, fracture, and absorb Bayezid's formations. The Ottomans, who had effortlessly defeated the heavy stone and steel of Europe, were dismantled by a faster, deadlier version of their own military philosophy. The defeat at Ankara was absolute. Sultan Bayezid was captured alive by Timur, humiliated, and kept in captivity until his death. The physical removal of the Sultan acted as a kill switch for the Ottoman state apparatus. Without the central warlord to direct momentum and distribute wealth, the system failed. The empire shattered into a decade-long bloodbath known as the Ottoman Interregnum, where Bayezid's sons waged a brutal civil war to claim the empty throne. This dark period exposed a fatal vulnerability. A state built entirely on continuous outward momentum and the charisma of a single ruler dissolves the moment that momentum halts. To survive this fracturing, reunite their territories, and finally conquer Constantinople half-century later, the Ottomans had to evolve from a predatory warband into a centralized institutional empire. In the early 1400s, the Ottoman state was a fractured, fragile entity, a stark departure from its later reputation as an immovable juggernaut. The empire's momentum broke at the 1402 Battle of Ankara. Sultan Bayezid I was captured by Timurid forces, leaving a power vacuum that triggered an 11-year civil war known as the Ottoman Interregnum. To prevent another internal collapse, the dynasty adopted a brutal mechanism for survival. They institutionalized fratricide, ensuring only one heir could claim the throne. The interregnum left a deep psychological scar on Ottoman leadership. It proved that the throne was never safe from internal division, forcing future sultans to adopt extreme measures to secure their position. Military victories at Kosovo in 1389 secured the geopolitical borders, but they also masked a rising internal threat. An entrenched aristocratic vizier class was beginning to operate independently of the throne. When the 12-year-old Mehmed II first took the throne in 1444, he arrived as a powerless figurehead, propped up by these elite bureaucrats. The true architect of state policy was the Grand Vizier, Chandanli Halil Pasha, the leader of a political faction that now held more influence than the Sultan himself. Within 2 years, Halil Pasha orchestrated the boy's removal. Mehmed was forced into a cold, humiliating exile in the provincial city of Manisa. In Manisa, Mehmed learned that a royal bloodline was worthless if the mechanisms of government were controlled by rivals. True sovereignty required leverage so massive it would silence the vizier class forever. Mehmed needed a victory that equated his name with the state itself. Mehmed returned to the throne at age 21 with a singular, impossible obsession: the conquest of Constantinople. Grand Vizier Halil Pasha fiercely opposed the siege. He feared Western retaliation and fought to maintain the political status quo that secured his own power. Mehmed used the war preparations to outmaneuver the vizier. He rallied the Janissaries and border lords directly to his side, securing their loyalty with promises of glory. This redirection of loyalty stripped the vizier of his leverage before the first shot was fired. The march on Constantinople functioned as a shadow war against his own government. Mehmed was using an external enemy to solve an internal crisis. The Theodosian walls had stood unconquered for over 1,000 years, defining the limits of medieval warfare. Mehmed overcame the walls by commissioning unprecedented technological might, specifically massive siege cannons capable of shattering ancient masonry. When the Byzantine defensive chain blocked the Golden Horn, Mehmed bypassed it by transporting a fleet of ships overland, dragging them across log rollers over the steep hills of Galata. These extreme tactics were met with deep skepticism by the military command, but were executed through Mehmed's sheer force of will. The staggering scale of the 1453 siege demonstrated a clear message to his own army. His authority was absolute, and he would bend nature itself to his command. On May 29, 1453, the walls were breached and the Byzantine Empire was extinguished. Shortly after the conquest, Mehmed ordered the immediate arrest and execution of Grand Vizier Chandarli Halil Pasha. This execution permanently shattered the independent vizier class that had plagued previous sultans. Mehmed replaced the old elites with loyal servants drawn from the devshirme system, men whose status depended entirely on their obedience to the sultan. The greatest siege in medieval history was ultimately the weapon Mehmed used to commit domestic political assassination and establish total autocracy. Following the conquest, Mehmed claimed the title Kaiser-i-Rum, Caesar of Rome, to signify his universal, unchecked rule. The faction-ridden principality of the past was gone, replaced by a highly centralized, unified superpower. This terrifyingly efficient autocracy, free from internal checks and balances, would go on to shape global geopolitics for the next 5 centuries. The fall of Constantinople signaled a calculated political transformation, birthing the absolute Ottoman autocrat from the ruins of the Roman Empire. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantine Empire survived behind a shield of stone. The multi-layered Theodosian walls successfully repelled centuries of direct, brute force assaults. Yet survival depended entirely on the water. The Bosphorus Strait was an open airway, importing essential supplies and naval aid. While these lanes remained open, the city could outlast any siege. An attacking army would starve and succumb to disease before citizens felt a shortage. When 21-year-old Mehmed II ascended the Ottoman throne in 1451, he inherited the ambition to take the city. But he recognized a flaw in how his predecessors had fought. To kill an armored giant, you ignore the armor. You target the airway. Defeating Constantinople was a problem of geography. The Ottomans needed to completely sever the city from the rest of the world. Mehmed selected the narrowest choke point along the Bosphorus Strait, roughly 6 miles north of the city walls. He pushed the construction at a rate that defied contemporary standards, driving his highest pashas against one another in a ruthless building competition. Laborers scavenged materials from the landscape, tearing down ancient churches for heavy stone blocks. These ruins were mortared directly into the rising Ottoman walls. When local Greek villagers protested the destruction of their holy sites, Mehmed ordered them captured and executed, signaling the start of total war. The sprawling fortification dominating the shoreline was complete in only 4 months. The structure was officially named Rumeli Hisar. It earned the nickname the Throat Cutter. The Sultan armed the castle with heavy artillery and issued a decree. All passing ships must stop and pay a toll. In November 1452, a Venetian vessel attempted to run the blockade. The Ottoman guns blew the ship out of the water. Its surviving captain was dragged ashore and executed, his body impaled on a stake in full view of the strait. Through architectural speed and physical force, Mehmed had turned the city's primary trade route into a lethal, inescapable checkpoint. With the airway constricted, the Ottomans turned their attention to the armor. Mehmed employed a Hungarian engineer named Urban, pairing him with the Ottoman cannon master Sarucha, to design a weapon specifically engineered to break stone. To withstand the pressure of its massive stone ammunition, the foundry produced a bronze barrel of enormous volume and thickness. This weapon is recorded in history as the basilic. The weapon required an immense logistical operation. It fired solid stone balls weighing upwards of 600 kilograms, requiring teams of oxen and hundreds of men just to transport the ammunition. During its initial test fire outside Edirne, the detonation produced a concussive shockwave that rippled across the landscape. The blast was reportedly heard for miles. While the throat cutter ensured the Byzantines could not escape, this new leap in artillery ensured their walls could no longer protect them. By early 1453, Constantinople was entirely severed from the world. No grain from the Black Sea, no naval reinforcements from the west. Inside the city, the psychological pressure mounted. Citizens could hear the distant, booming echoes of the Ottoman cannon tests drifting across the plains of Thrace. And when the Ottoman army finally assembled, the view from the ramparts was bleak. An estimated 100,000 soldiers set up camp, their nightly fires turning the horizon into a sea of flames. This campaign of isolation and technological threat drained the defenders' morale before the battle even began. They were outnumbered and completely alone. The breach in the walls in May was the conclusion to a process that started months earlier. Total isolation had ended the empire's viability long before the first stone fell. By the middle of the 15th century, the Roman Empire had been reduced to a single, heavily fortified peninsula. Constantinople stood as the unconquered center of the medieval world, an isolated Christian bastion surrounded by hostile territory. For more than a millennium, this city survived every threat thrown at it. Arab sieges, Bulgar incursions, and naval assaults by the Rus all shattered against its perimeter. Every major power in the region had tried to capture it, and every single one had failed. The primary reason for those 1,000 years of survival was a massive network of stone fortifications known as the Theodosian walls. These defenses featured a moat, an outer wall, and a massive inner wall studded with towers, creating a multi-tiered kill zone for any approaching army. Breaching this perimeter meant overcoming structural obstacles that contemporary military theory considered insurmountable. The walls were specifically built to outlast any siege technology of the era. When the 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II ascended to the Ottoman throne, he inherited an empire divided by geography. His domains spanned both Europe and Asia, but Constantinople sat directly in the middle, physically splitting his power and posing a constant strategic threat. To secure his approach, Mehmed ordered the construction of a massive stone fortress known as Rumeli Hisar. Positioned on the edge of the Bosphorus Strait, it gave Ottoman cannons complete control over all maritime traffic. This map of the Bosphorus reveals the city's triangular peninsula. Mehmed planned to attack 3 sides simultaneously: the western landwalls, the Golden Horn, and the Sea of Marmara. By positioning forces along these boundaries, the Ottomans cut off every retreat, trapping the defenders entirely. The Sultan's strategy relied on a total geographic enclosure. By compressing the peninsula from the land, the harbor, and the open sea, he stretched the Byzantine defense until the medieval system of siegecraft reached its absolute limit. The assault on the western land walls began in early April 1453. Here, Mehmed deployed a relatively new technology that would dictate the brutal pace of the siege: heavy gunpowder artillery. The sheer scale of Urban's 26-foot bronze supercannon provided a destructive force the city's masonry could not withstand. It fired stone balls weighing over 1,000 pounds, generating a deafening shockwave that shattered ancient stone. The Byzantine defense, led by the Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani, responded with desperate ingenuity. As soon as a wall section collapsed, his troops spent the night filling the craters with earth, timber, and rubble to absorb the next day's impacts. Mehmed countered by maintaining a continuous barrage. Ottoman artillery crews fired in shifts, keeping the bombardment belling day and night to physically exhaust the defenders and prevent them from repairing the breaches. While cannons battered the walls above ground, Ottoman sappers dug deep underneath them. These specialized mining units excavated elaborate tunnel networks, packing them with gunpowder to collapse the stone bastions from the bottom up. After 6 weeks of this dual-level destruction, the massive stone defenses were crumbling. The successful use of heavy cannons proved that high, thick walls were no longer sufficient to protect an empire. Meanwhile, out on the Sea of Marmara, a massive Ottoman fleet formed a tight naval blockade. The goal was to cut off the shipping lanes, denying the city any food or reinforcements from Christian Europe. But on April 20th, the blockade failed. A small flotilla of Genoese relief ships, favored by strong winds and skilled maneuvering, smashed right through the Ottoman lines to deliver desperately needed grain to the besieged city. To the north, the defenders relied on a physical barrier. A massive iron chain composed of heavy, interlocking links was drawn taut across the mouth of the Golden Horn, making it physically impossible for the Ottoman fleet to sail in and attack the weaker sea walls. With the relief ships arriving and the northern harbor entirely sealed off by the chain, a standard waiting game favored the Byzantines. Mehmed realized he had to circumvent the harbor defenses entirely. The Sultan devised a plan to bypass the iron chain. He ordered his fleet to travel over dry land. Ottoman engineers leveled a path across the steep hills of Beşiktaş. Using teams of oxen, wooden rollers, and copious amounts of animal fat for grease, they hauled roughly 70 warships out of the Bosphorus, up over the hills, and dropped them directly into the Golden Horn. This map of the siege illustrates the immediate tactical crisis for the Byzantines. With enemy warships now operating inside the previously secure harbor, the defenders had to pull troops away from the battered land walls to guard the long, vulnerable sea walls. At dawn on May 29th, Mehmed launched a massive, coordinated final assault. He sent his forces in 3 escalating waves, finishing with the Janissaries. These highly disciplined elite shock troops pushed through the exhausted defenders and the crumbling masonry of the land walls. The defensive line finally broke when Commander Giustiniani was severely wounded and carried off the battlefield. Emperor Constantine XI, seeing the line collapsing around him, drew his sword and charged into the fray, disappearing into the chaos of the breach. With their commander gone and enemy troops pouring over the walls and swarming the harbor, the defense disintegrated. The simultaneous collapse across all three fronts ended the Roman state after more than 1,000 years. By the afternoon, the fighting subsided. Mehmed II rode his horse through the battered gates, claiming the city as his new imperial capital. He went directly to the Hagia Sophia, the symbolic center of Eastern Christianity. By ordering an immediate call to prayer within its walls, he formally converted the structure into a mosque, merging Roman architectural heritage with Islamic tradition. Mehmed viewed his conquest as the continuation of the Roman lineage. By claiming the title Kaiser-i Rum, the Caesar of Rome, he integrated Roman, Turkish, and Islamic traditions into a single unified authority. Recognizing that an empire needs a functioning center, he immediately set about revitalizing the city. He paid ransoms, mandated the relocation of artisans, and encouraged Christians, Jews, and Muslims to settle together to rebuild a cosmopolitan commercial hub. The Sultan transitions the Ottoman state into the administrative and spiritual center of the ancient world, securing the former empire's machinery for his own. The city's fall sent an economic shockwave. By controlling the Bosphorus, the Ottomans severed overland Silk Road routes. Facing exclusion from Eastern markets, merchants sailed west across the Atlantic and south around Africa, accelerating the Age of Discovery. Militarily, the siege proved that medieval defensive strategies had reached their end. Urban's massive bronze cannons demonstrated that no wall, no matter how thick or ancient, could withstand organized gunpowder artillery. For the Ottomans, capturing Constantinople bridged their territories, turning them into a centralized global superpower that would dominate politics for the next 5 centuries. The 53-day siege of Constantinople severed the final link to the ancient Roman world. The fall of the city ended the era of walled defensive supremacy and established the economic and technological trajectory for the modern era.